I will be very brief with my introductory remarks, but I do want to just say that I'm very excited that our very own Amanda Solomon-Amaral is going to be helping us close for the symposium, both for today as like the domestic student focus day, but just as the symposium as a whole. And so if Amanda can come on up and we can give her a round of applause.
Hello. Hi. Okay. So we are a nice, intimate group, so I don't want to be all the way up at the podium far away from all of you. And also, when I lecture, I rarely stand still. So I kind of need to be roaming, because otherwise my brain won't work. It's just used to engaging with my students, and I'm very looking forward to engaging with you all. Because I've really enjoyed the past 2 days that we've had together in the sessions and hearing your thoughts, and it's a wonderful honor that Wendy asked me to close the symposium for us. And I feel a lot of pressure to follow up on Provost Wayne from yesterday morning, because he kept saying all the things I would wrap up and say. And so now I feel like I need to live up to what he shared. And speaking of Provost Wayne, I want to return to the title of his amazing grounding that he began with, which was both a rhetorical and not a rhetorical question, which is what makes us an us. And he had asked this question in recognition of the undeniable and deep diversity, right, within this category of students that we have labeled APIMED, right? I think that has been a powerful prevailing theme in every one of our sessions, is that you cannot say one thing that's going to be categorically true for every single self-identified APIMED student that we may be working with in the university. And I don't think that this is a problem. Okay, I think that we need to lean into this diversity and understand this diversity as the grounding of our way of working with students and centering their experiences at this university. So Wayne, and again, I cannot rehearse his amazing compression of how many years of Asian American history into 50 minutes, speaking of Wayne, hi Provost Wayne. But just as a reminder, he proposed some, I think, really important questions, right? Like, what makes us an us? What makes APIMED APIMED? You know, is it race? No, because race is a social construction, right? Simply because I look similar to Joanne doesn't mean she and I perfectly agree or perfectly have the same experiences and perspectives in life, right? And so race, this assumption based on phenotypical similarity, right, of deep essential unity is false. It's not true, right? So it's not race. Is it culture? That's hard, right? Because as we talked about, all of the sub-ethnic groups within this large umbrella category have very different and divergent cultural, linguistic, religious practices, right? Well, is it a shared experience of colonization, of war, a shared love of spam, as we talked about yesterday morning? And no, right, because even within ethnic groups, Asian ethnic groups, we have been our own colonizers in some cases, right? We have waged war against each other in some cases. So it's not that there's an easy binary of us as APIMED people and them. That's not true historically. Is it Orientalism, right? Is it a larger us versus them, this exotification of the near, far Middle East? And I think, again, Wayne did an amazing job of debunking that, right? Because Orientalism in its word and the orientation, that Orientalism changes with your orientation, right? Who you exotify changes based on your positionality. And again, with the vast diversity of APIMED students, or APIMED ethnic groups, we also self-orientalize, right? Like we also exotify, we also other within our group. Is it homonationalism, that big word from Jasbir Puar? Is it a shared desire to assimilate into US society and culture, to aspire to a proximity to whiteness, to middle class security and respectability politics? I don't think that's true either, right? Because just as there have been many Asian American and Pacific Islander, Middle Eastern communities that aspire for inclusion in the US nation, there are just as many groups and individuals who reject and critique and fight against and work against, right? The structural underpinnings of capitalism and white supremacy and native settler colonialism, right? So it can't be that. Is it the model minority myth that unites us? I mean, maybe, in that we all have to deal with it in some way, right? And it's been used as a racial wedge, right, against our black and brown brothers and sisters and siblings. But I don't think that's it either, right? Because as, again, Provost Wayne pointed out, it's none of the above, because we're so much more diverse within groups than across groups, right? The prevailing truth is our diversity as APIMED folk. So I'm going to pick up where Wayne left off, which is what makes an us. Well, it could be this idea of solidarity, right? It's not that there's this essential, inherent, universal, transcendent thing that connects all APIMED people. It's something to do with this idea of solidarity, this practice of solidarity. And so to start us off then, I want to ask you a question. What is solidarity to you, right? What does that even mean to you? I think particularly in this post-George Floyd moment, we throw solidarity around, that word, but what exactly does it mean, right? How does it show up for you, right, in your choices, in your relationships, in your just daily living? Like, what is that? And so I know we're tired. So what I'm going to do is what I do with my students before I ask them to think, pair, share. We're going to stretch up. Stretch to the right. Stretch to the left. Hug yourself. Hug yourself. Okay. Now find a friend. Now turn to someone near you. Don't be lonely. Find a friend. Make eye contact. Okay? And so I want to give you a couple minutes to talk about this question, what is solidarity to you? And the first person who shares back to the large group after I give you time gets a hella Asian thing. I'm going to re-gift spam. I'm going to re-gift the spam from Provost Wayne, okay? So talk to your new friend. What is solidarity to you? Take a couple minutes. We'll share back the first person who really wants that re-gifted spam. We'll share their definition of solidarity. Okay, go. Talk to each other. Okay. All right. All right. Say thank you to your friend, to talking with you. Thank you for sharing thoughts. Thank you for sharing ideas. Okay, who hella wants to spam? Who wants to go first and share what they think solidarity is to them? Oh, I knew it'd be Grace. You know you want the spam, Grace.
Dude, I'm making this for breakfast tomorrow morning, so. Okay, come over. Spam, eggs, and rice. We'll have it. I wanted to answer this question like as soon as you put it up on the screen, and I think part of it is because like the way I see solidarity is that I'm so deeply connected to every single one of you in this room at like levels of consciousness that most of us don't think at. And it isn't about what you experience and how that's separate from me, but rather that like what you experience is so part of me. And that I genuinely care that like if you're experiencing a hardship or if you're experiencing discrimination, it's not a you problem, it's an us problem, because there's something in the system that either I'm contributing to that's continuing to allow that oppression or discrimination, and I might be also experiencing it in other ways, and so I just have this a deep connection to other human beings, and I think that's where the solidarity piece is. It's not about the other, it's about like us, yeah.
Thanks so much, Grace. You said so many beautiful things there that I just want to like highlight. So this idea of interconnectivity, right? And this idea of mutual recognition, that you see the struggles or whatever the person in front of you is going through is not just their problem, right? Because we exist in a larger and complicated social web, right? And whether or not we may actively uphold certain systems, we are still participating in those systems, right, by virtue of existing in this society. And so lack of action is still allowing whatever system to continue and whatever impact that system has on others to continue. And so it's both this macro recognition of this interconnectivity, whether I want it or not, right, or recognize it or not, and that's balanced again against this beautiful micro recognition of this other person's humanity, right? That like I see you, you see me, I'm with you, you're with me, and like whatever you're going through, I need to recognize, right? And I need to also reflect on and act on as well, right? So thank you so much for sharing that. That is just, I think, a beautiful way of talking about it. And so, you know, I hope you had a moment to reflect also then on your own sort of individual understanding of solidarity, because again, we tend to hear this word a lot, but when have we had the moment to sort of stop and critically reflect on what it means? And in particular for today, what does that mean after the end of a 2-day symposium on APIMED as students, right? Like, what does solidarity mean for us in the context of what we've been learning, right, about our students who fall into this category or self-identify into this category. So I'm going to give you a definition of solidarity from a UCSD alumna, Alicia Garza. I'm a little biased because she was a Marshall student, and I assign chapters of her book, Purpose of Power, to my students actually in doc. So this is a definition. We just started this, Fanon, yeah. And so I really like this definition. I tend to work in threes when I give my lectures because I feel like 3 points is the max my students can process in a 50-minute lecture. It's the max I can process and talk about in a 50-minute lecture. And I like her definition because to me, it's can be defined or distilled down into 3 verbs, okay, or 3 gerunds. Sorry, that's the writing person in me here. Solidarity means trying to understand the ways our communities experience unique forms of oppression and marginalization. It means showing up for one another to bear witness, and then expanding our fight to include the challenges faced by other communities besides our own, right? So I hope to take the rest of our time to think about how Alicia Garza's definition of solidarity intersects with what we've been learning about with APIMED students, and then more importantly for this closing session, can translate into concrete takeaways and actions for you yourself, right? As you are hoping to center and to engage APIMED students in your day-to-day work on our campus, right? So I want to highlight that pan-ethnic solidarity is the radical root, okay, of the APIMED identity and community. Because again, as we have talked about over and over again in every session, the deep diversity and difference of this group is undeniable. So then why are we cohering, right, as a group if those differences are so powerful? We cohere in many cases because we choose to, right? We choose to recognize the interconnectedness of our identities and our struggles. And the origin of particularly the Asian American identity, the Asian American community, the Asian American movement can be traced to California higher education spaces. And I'm talking about the Third World Liberation Front. I'm talking about student movements in the Bay Area, particularly SF State and UC Berkeley, in which during that radical milieu, right, of the 60s, of anti-war protests, of the height of the civil rights movement, Black, brown, and quote-unquote Asian students recognized the international and domestic connections between campaigns, movements, protests for liberation, right? Against colonization in the home countries, against the Cold War, right? The struggle between Western capitalism and socialism, and this embrace of this Asian American pan-ethnic identity, okay, in particular in this moment, was a very decisive choice, right? To come together despite differences, historical differences, and recognize that there is unity in our numbers, but more important, there is unity in agreeing on common goals for liberation, okay? And so we have to remember that. Like, it's very empowering for me personally, and I hope for you to remember that, right? And so the response to domestic racism, for example, really fueled this coming together of the Asian American community. Who's heard the name Vincent Chin? Okay, a few of you. Right, so Vincent Chin was a young man living in Detroit, Michigan in the late 70s, and he was murdered. He was really one of the first noteworthy victims in the modern period of anti-Asian violence. He was murdered the night before his wedding. It was the height of anti-Japanese sentiment because of Japanese economic competition with the United States and the dissolution of the US auto industry. His attackers, who were a father and a son, blamed him for their recent layoff from the auto industry and killed him in the parking lot of a nightclub where he was celebrating his bachelor party. And this was one of the first cases of the violation of an Asian American civil rights. And his death was one of these moments in which the Asian American community came together, despite the differences, right, in terms of their immigration, stories, narratives, countries of origins, where they recognized that Vincent Chin, a Chinese American mistaken for a Japanese immigrant, that shared experience, right, and that shared vulnerability to anti-Asian hate was of concern to all of us, right? And so, again, we need to remember that the embrace of this Asian American identity, this pan-ethnic identity, is rooted in solidarity, right? In the recognition that Vincent Chin could have been anyone's son, anyone's brother, anyone's uncle, right, within this diverse community and group. Also, the pan-ethnic roots of solidarity, of Asian American solidarity, is also cross-racial, right? So as the Asian American movement gained ground, it was not divorced from movements for Black liberation, right? So we need to recognize that as well. Just as the Third World Liberation Front knew that you cannot disentangle domestic and international concerns, the Asian American movement, the early movement, also recognized that you cannot fight anti-Asian violence and anti-Asian hate without fighting anti-Black racism, too, right? And so we have really powerful historical examples of young Asian or early Asian American activists who were deeply involved in Black liberation and were engaged in cross-racial alliances. And we see that continue today, right? Unfortunately, in our current historic moment, with the increased visibility of anti-Asian hate fueled by the pandemic and anti-Asian rhetoric by political figures, we see that what is happening to our Black, Brown, and Asian American communities are not isolated things. And how are we recognizing and analyzing, right, these larger systems and structures that are impacting us, and how do we see, right, the mutual entwining of our destinies and our positions in the United States? And so the answer could be solidarity, right? What makes us and us is solidarity, is this choice, right? To not forget the differences, but to recognize them, to work through them, to center them, and still choose to work together towards a common goal of liberation, right? I'm not saying that's easy to do, right? But there are historical precedents and moments that we can hold on to and think about as we move forward and navigate and negotiate the ever-changing political and racial landscape we live in. So, I'm gonna make my thesis statement. Sorry, I teach in the writing programs for my lecture, which is that solidarity is student-centeredness, okay? So VCSA Satterland yesterday morning read the statement of student-centeredness for our university, right? And I want to pose, maybe some would think, a radical claim that to practice solidarity is to practice student-centeredness. It is to center our students' experiences, unique identities, needs, and positionalities, right? And I say this not as a professor of Asian American cultural studies, not even as a woman of color feminist, though all of those things inform why I say solidarity is student-centeredness, but because I myself am in higher education, because I had mentors, faculty, and staff who their practice of student-centeredness, when it came to me personally, was through solidarity, was through the fact that they took the time to see me, right? And critically reflect on the differences between us and still choose to support my needs as a student. So my parents left the Philippines during the dictatorship under Ferdinand Marcos. And if you're up on current world news, his son has just been elected president, which is causing a lot of intergenerational trauma right now. But my parents left the Philippines. They were the good immigrant that was prioritized by the immigration law changes that Wayne very kindly went over for us yesterday morning, right? My parents were both able to immigrate because they each had a sibling who was a nurse. And so they were trained as nurses. My aunties were trained as nurses in the Philippines, actively recruited to staff the medical industrial complex that was growing here in the United States. They came and, you know, through chain migration, they were able to bring all 7 siblings on my dad's side and all 6 siblings on my mom's side to the United States, right? So we are a product, our immigration history is profoundly a product of these international concerns, right? Of global capitalism in the Philippines by the United States. And so once here, my mom and dad started a small business, and they pursued, as we talked about for many of our speakers, the American dream. And part of that pursuit was to put me and my sister in the best schools possible, which for them were Catholic schools, because they were really good Filipino Catholics, and I needed to do math and know Jesus, because that was the key to success for them. And it also included not teaching me my own language, right? My parents were so proud my English was so good, right? They did not actively cultivate Tagalog in our household. They spoke it amongst themselves, and that's when you knew you were in trouble, because they were talking about you in Tagalog, and you were like, oh God, what did I do, right? But otherwise, they were so proud, right, that they were able to send us to good schools, and we did the best we could. But that created a weird state of mind for me, right? Like, we lived in a very predominantly Filipino enclave. My dad was one of 4 Filipino businesses on the block, and we were told, assimilate, assimilate, assimilate. But I wasn't white, and I knew that, right? And like, what did that mean for me? And, you know, I got into high school, and that's me in high school. I show this to my students, and they love it. They love seeing my high school yearbook photo. But when I got to high school, I was very much a model minority. I excelled in school, right? Because I felt like I was making them proud, right? I was doing what I needed to do, contribute to the family in the way I contributed. But I could get an A in history, in AP US history, but I did not know my own family's history, right? And I did not know what I wanted to do when I graduated high school. Everyone kept telling me to be a nurse because I was smart, and that's what Filipino women do. They become nurses. And I remember my first teacher who was ever in solidarity with me. His name was Mr. James Weldon. He taught AP World Lit, and he told me, hey, you're really good at this. Like, you clearly love to read, and you clearly love to write. What are you gonna major in college? And I was like, my mom wants me to be a nurse. And he's like, do you wanna be a nurse? And I go, no. And he says, you could major in English literature. And I was like, I could? Like, I had no idea that that was an option, right? I had no idea. And that was the first teacher who saw me. That was the first teacher who saw me. And I was like, okay, Mom, I'm going to major in English literature. And she goes, why? And I was like, because I think I'm good at it. And she's like, you don't want to be a nurse? And I'm like, no. And she looks at me, and she's like, okay, yeah, you can major in English. You'll be a lawyer. And I go, okay, sure, Mom, right? So I go, and I'm in college, and I remember the second instructor, the second educator in higher education who saw me again. Her name was Professor Eileen Fung. She was the chair of the English program and the new chair of the newly formed Asian American Studies program. And I was enrolled in her freshman seminar, and it was the first time I had a teacher who looked like me. It was the first time. And she was teaching Chinatown literature, because I went to school at the University of San Francisco, also another good Catholic school, right, because that's where they sent me. And we were reading novels where I could recognize in the characters my own family, where I could see my aunties and my uncles. In particular, we read a novel by Fei Mian Ning called Bone, which was about 2 young sisters in Chinatown growing up, and that was me and my sister. Like, I had never read stories that actually represented my life. And again, Professor Fung, she talked to me. She was like, you seem to really like this. And I'm like, I do. And she's like, have you ever considered taking a double major or a minor in Asian American Studies? And I'm like, that's a thing? And she's like, yes, it's a thing. And I'm like, okay. So I remember going to her office, signing the paperwork, and enrolling as one of the first students, because they just started an Asian American Studies program. And that was, again, another moment in which an educator took the time to center my interests, my experience, my positionality, and to just ask me a question that I never knew I could even ask, right? She helped me apply to graduate school. She wrote my letters of recommendation. She picked UCSD for me. She said, you should go here. Lisa Lowe is here. Lisa Yonayama is here. I'm like, who are these people? She's like, don't worry, it's good, you should go. And I'm like, okay. And then they accepted me, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to graduate school. What is graduate school, right? I did not know what that was. I took my mom for the open house, And she was like, oh, this is a big public school. Is it safe? And I'm like, I think so. And she's like, okay. And I remember telling her, Mom, I'm a little nervous. I really don't know what I'm doing here, right? And she goes, and to her credit, she said, hey, it's okay, just try it. And if you don't like it, you can come back. And that was really helpful. And the third educator who saw me was Jody Blanco. He's professor of literature. He was assigned to me as my mentor coming into the literature program. And it was his first year at UCSD. He had just finished his postdoc, and we were coming in at the same time. And he and Rosemary George, God rest her soul, both took me under their wing and both said, you have something important to say. And that was the first time anyone had told me that I could be a professor, that I could be Eileen Fung, right? That I could be this woman who had seen me and shown me my potential, right? And so I got my PhD, right? And thank you. And so now this is why I do what I do, right? Which is make spaces for students, and I have a particularly soft spot in my heart for Filipina students to see themselves and be seen, right? Because solidarity is student-centeredness, right? So here are some 3 post-symposium steps to solidarity for all of you, okay? And again, I think 3 is a manageable number. So this is why I'm giving you 3. So the first thing, solidarity means trying to understand the ways our communities experience unique forms of oppression and marginalization. Put another way, again to quote Provost Wayne, who was quoting Jackie Alexander yesterday morning, we must be fluent in each other's struggles, right? So, how will you continue to educate yourself beyond this symposium? Because no matter how great Wayne's compression of all of Asian American history was into 1 hour, and no matter how great these past 2 days of sessions have been, that's not enough. 2 days at a symposium does not make you an expert, right? It doesn't make anyone an expert. So what are you going to do to continue your learning and your growth, right? And it's okay if you know that this, or if you're leaving the symposium and you'll be like, oh God, I know shit. I don't know anything, right? Like this is so much more complicated than I thought. That's okay, right? Just lean into those learning edges, right? Practice critical self-reflection. The sign of wisdom is that you know you don't know. That's the sign of wisdom, right? And so if you know you don't know, then now you know where to start. Like, I don't really know much about Sawana. I didn't know that was a thing, right? Like, how can I educate myself more about that? Right? How will you continue to dig deeper into the intersectional differences and the complex histories of APIMED students? Because again, as we saw from the amazing presentations, I know very deeply what it means to be a Filipina American, but I don't know what it means to be Fijian, right? Or the specific needs of our Pacific Islander students, and I need to show up. I need to lean into that. I need to increase my understanding. And that's okay. We all do. Nobody knows everything. If we knew everything, we would not be at the university, right? Here are some resources, amazing resources I want to shout out. PBS did an incredible 6-part documentary simply called Asian Americans, and it is like a hit parade of every Asian American studies rock star in the field, so please check that out if you love to watch things, documentaries. Check out the programming by APIMED. They do amazing things. If you haven't gone to community time or community hour or to any of the mixers, just go and build community. Continue to do that. I got to give a shout out to one of my dear friends, Robin Rodriguez. She just came out with this book on Asian American activism with Diane Fujino. And this is an incredible text which really looks at the ways in which Asian Americans have been at the forefront of social change. Right? And so if you're interested in learning from there, please check it out. She's leaving UC Davis, but she's an amazing scholar. So second, solidarity means showing up for one another to bear witness. And this can be really hard, right? What does it mean to bear witness, right? It means to affirm and confirm. Even if you are not yourself going through it, it means to affirm that the other person has a right to what they are feeling and that it is true what they are feeling, right? It's not to diminish a microaggression. It's not to ignore it, right? It's not to glaze over it. It's to literally stop and be like, I am witnessing that this is hard for you. And I confirm that this is happening right now, even if I do not fully understand it, even if it is not fully impacting me, right? It's to validate the lived experiences of our APIMED students, okay? And that can be hard, right? Because that can mean having to reckon with our own guilt sometimes, our own ignorance, our own lack of attention. But if we let guilt become toxic shame, then we do nothing. But if it's reparative guilt, if it's guilt that makes you recognize that apathy continues to exacerbate the problem and that I want to be here for you, then that feeling can be incredibly productive and helpful, right? So, how are you checking your privilege? How are you decentering your own worldview to make room for another's? And how are you recognizing and wielding your power? Because all of us, faculty, staff, we have a level of power when it comes to students, right? We may not feel it, we may not feel like we got a lot of power, but it really does mean something when you confirm and affirm to a student that their experience is legitimate, right? And you don't downplay it. How many times have you had a student say, I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't be asking for this excuse or, this extension or this, grace because my mom died, but I need it. And I'm like, whoa. If your mom died, you are fully, no, right? We should stop and we should think about this. Our students downplay themselves all the time, right? So how can we show up for them and bear witness to what they're going through? Third, expanding our fight to include the challenges faced by other communities beside our own. So this is really important, okay? Understandably, we're all human beings, okay? And it can be hard to expand our worldview, right? And recognize others. But how can we do that? How can we fight not just for our immediate group or our immediate community, but again, as Grace pointed out, recognize the intertwining and interconnectedness between communities and groups. And I want to offer the beautiful example of Yuri Kochiyama. Who's heard of Yuri Kochiyama? Okay, cool. So Yuri Kochiyama, Japanese-American internee. She was interned under Executive Order 9066. Her family lost everything on the West Coast, so she relocated to New York. And in New York, she became deeply involved with Black liberation. She and Malcolm X were deep collaborators. She became known as the internet of the Black liberation movement in Harlem. And it was because she worked as a waitress in a restaurant that became a central node of communication for Black liberation movements at the time. And she would pass on messages because she had the phone at the restaurant, and if folks needed information, she would give them, okay? And Yuri Kochiyama was someone who was politicized or became politicized through her own experience of internment, but really came into her own understanding of political activism within Black liberation and through her relationship to Malcolm X. And she deeply recognized, right, that if we want to combat white supremacy, it's not that you can only focus on anti-Asian violence or anti-Black racism. White supremacy is a comprehensive system that relies on people of color not to cooperate with each other, right? And so Yuri Kochiyama is a beautiful and powerful reminder that solidarity means we have to fight with and for each other, not against each other, right? For the scraps, not against each other for limited resources, but with and for each other to expand a comprehensive vision of liberation for all, right? So, understand, show up, fight, right? I'm distilling solidarity down to 3 words, okay? So what are your 3 post-symposium steps to solidarity? Okay, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to talk to that friend again. Like, think about this. What are ways you're going to understand? What are ways you're going to show up? What are ways you're going to fight after these last 2 days? And then you can choose from the Sabzi that Wayne gave me yesterday morning or organic soy sauce. Okay? So talk to each other, and then we'll have 2 people share out, and then we'll close up. Okay? Talk, talk, talk. Okay, can we just get 2 people to share some post-symposium steps? And it's no shame. You know you want this sabzi. You know you want this organic soy sauce. It's organic. I wish it was low sodium. It's not, sorry. Okay, who wants to go? I need 2 volunteers, just 2. Anybody? 2. Oh, don't make me do it. I do it to my students. The first person who makes eye contact with me, I usually am like, you go. So, come on. Anybody? I know. Then they all look down. They all look away. They don't want to look at me. Okay, Jaja. No, I'm just kidding. I gave you a heart attack. Okay, anyone? Just 2 people. Post-symposium stuff. One thing that you might do after the symposium. Woohoo! Do you want soy sauce or do you want sabzi? Whichever one. Okay. This one? This one? This one? Okay. Okay. All right. Did you want to share?
Yeah, I'll share. One of mine is a practical application. I remember when I worked at a hospital, I worked with a lot of international physicians, and I could always pronounce their names correctly. And coming to UCSD, I noticed oftentimes someone will introduce themselves, and I will hear them, and I go to say, say that again, and I notice that the individual will, diminish. They'll say, Shirley is my name. And I said, okay, but a practical application, I want to make sure that I allow others to be heard, to take the time to listen and hear what it is they're saying, and not challenge them, but create a space where they feel comfortable, where they can repronounce, and I can take the time to repronounce, and we can take the time to both be heard, creating that space. Did you want to? Okay, all right.
Thank you so much. Joseph. Here you go. Thank you, Jojo. Here, have soy sauce.
Okay, thank you. I could put it in Spaces. Hi, I'm Jojo from Spaces. I think one of the things I was talking about in our table was like making sure that we understand the complexities of each communities. And so one of the things that I experience in Spaces, for instance, is when I work with the Indonesian students, Indonesian Americans, a lot of them are actually Batak, which is a different ethnic group, which is predominantly a Christian group in Indonesia. So there's this blanket that we think Indonesians are Muslims, and then they come in and they're like, no, we're actually Christian. And so that sort of deeper understanding of the complexities of these communities. Another one with working with international students from like Saudi Arabia or the Middle East, what we call Middle East, is that a lot of them have been telling us that they're not allowed to come to Spaces, they're not supposed to go to the cross-cultural center or work with MSA because part of their government conversation is that we might radicalize them to fight against giving them rights. And so there's a lot of stories that we hear about that. So how do we support them when we actually support the students, the Muslim students in Spaces, right? And so they sort of sneak into our centers and in our programs, and then telling us not to take pictures just in case that might be leaked to the consulate. So those are the hardships that I think when we think about solidarity, also understanding that there's complexities of the students and how do we keep them safe and experience what they need to experience in college.
Thank you, Jojo. All right, thank you so much for sharing. So I'm going to close out the symposium because I was told I was the closing session. So, and I'm going to close it out in a way that was very important to my political consciousness as a student when I was in undergraduate and then even into graduate school, actually. So isang bagsak is a Filipino term meaning one down, and it's a term that has become associated with what is called a unity clap. Has anyone experienced a unity clap? Yeah, okay, a bunch of you, good. All right, so Adrian Salazar is a Filipino-American environmental justice and racial justice activist, and he talks about isang bagsak as when we fall as one, right? When we allow these larger systems to go unrecognized and unresisted, we will all fall, right? All of us will suffer from white supremacy, from disaster capitalism, from homophobia. And so if it's going to affect us all, we're not saying in the same exact way, but it will affect us all, then we need to all rise together, right? We all need to work together to recognize and bear witness and expand our fights to include all of us. And so Isang Baksak, the unity clap practice, it's a slow clapping, which escalates in speed. And then I'll yell, Isang Baksak, and then you clap once in unison as a final sort of symbolic statement, right? That we all achieved something today, we're all committing to further action today, and in this moment, we are expressing symbolically and sonically our solidarity with each other and with our APIMED students. So, do you want to try this with me? Okay, stand up, okay.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Could you all first join me in a collective breath? 1, 2, 3, breathe in and out. Thank you. I know it's been a lot of information the past 2 days, and thank you again, Dr. Amanda Solomon, for sharing your insights, your personal story, your call to action, and for sharing us that one last Isang Baksak to bring us all back here together. I appreciated your closing remarks regarding how the UC San Diego community can come together to enhance the experiences of our Asian Pacific Islander and Middle Eastern students. And with that said, I would like to invite Vice Chancellor Allison Satterlund to join us in closing remarks.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. So on behalf of Vice Chancellor Pettit and all of our partners in academic and student affairs leadership, I want to thank each of you for engaging in the inaugural APIMED Symposium. As you all know, supporting UC San Diego students is a collaborative, collective effort across all of our teams and divisions, and it's been incredibly uplifting to see you all here the last few days, to hear your thoughtful questions, and to consider learning, how learning more about our APIMED student communities and their unique experiences can continue to improve our collective efforts around campus climate and to improve student experience through inclusive and engaged student programs and services. Please think about how you can apply what you've learned in your work today. Get a soda, refresh yourself, grab some lunch on your way out, snacks, etc. We need to take care of ourselves also in this important work. I ask that you continually engage in learning more about our student communities. And if you have an idea for additional professional development opportunities in support of our APIMED students, please let Becky and me and John and Jim know. We would be delighted to bring more resources to this important work. And I want to also invite you, as Dr. Solomon has asked us to do today, to continue to understand, to show up and fight. You can count on me to do that as well. So let's please enthusiastically thank our organizers one last time. So incredibly proud to have this as a new tradition at UC San Diego. So thank you all so much. Woo, woo, woo! So Andrew, I don't know if I should go ahead and invite you and the team up to the podium to really close us out.
Awesome. Thank you, Vice Chancellor Alice Sauerland, for the closing remarks. We promise this is the last closing remark of the day, and you're off. Brian and I would just like to thank everyone here for participating in the inaugural symposium on enhancing the student experience of Asian Pacific Islander and Middle Eastern descent. So thank yourself for being here. We appreciate it. We could not do this without the amazing committee members that have been involved. You saw their names, but I do want to also, some of them are still here, some of them are completing some work, of course, of their own jobs, right? We all volunteered our time and efforts in putting this together. So if you are part of the committee, if you can identify yourself, and if those around here can give them a round of applause and recognize them, that would be great. So a few things I wanted to share is that this morning after day one of our committee members shared with us in our large chat that how powerful these past 2 days have been, just being around scholars and practitioners of Asian Pacific Islander Middle Eastern descent, and also co-conspirators and collaborators in enhancing the experience of our Asian Pacific Islander Middle Eastern descent students. And I will share, on my own personal note, is that I feel seen. I've only been here for 2 years, and joining UCSD, I joined it remotely. I joined in a new profession, a new functional area that I was not familiar with, but in a sense, I felt at home. And being offered then the opportunity to co-chair this symposium with Wendy Sasaki, who mentored me when I was an undergrad student, and I got to sit right beside her to chair this inaugural symposium, was an honor, a pleasure, and seeing it come true today has been amazing. And I want to repeat that, the work that we've done, the work that our students have done, the struggles that we all see, I feel like it's been brought to light. I feel seen. I've seen it's becoming less invisible and more visible to all of us. And I just want to say thank you. It's come a long way to where we are now, and there's still more work to be done. And I can't thank you enough for participating. I know COVID has placed us in a place where, learning has been difficult, and we have to adapt. And I'm excited that we are amenable, we're flexible, and we will make it happen. Anything that you've seen today, if we were able to record it, hopefully you can revisit. Hopefully you can share with your colleagues, and hopefully it will spread across our various divisions so that others can learn with you, right? And the discussion doesn't stop here. So with that being said, the last 2 days have been filled with a lot of learning and discussion, and I encourage you to take it away. Take it away and spread it out widely, everywhere. And I thank you for that. And I know Brian has a few words that we wanted to make sure that we recognize, so I'm going to pass it off to Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I'm going to keep my comments brief because you heard a lot from me today. And as much as I've heard good comments about some folks saying that, whatever, I also want to recognize that it, like Andrew mentioned, it's a team effort, right? And it's not just me. I think one of the things that Andrew had mentioned was being able to take this learning outwards to others, right? And I think if we're thinking about Amanda's kind of like 3 ideas in terms of things that we can do after the symposium, that expanding the fight one I know is something that's a little bit challenging to think of on the spot, and haven't had a lot of time to process. But if you want like an easy way out, expanding that fight out and sharing that knowledge to the folks that are not present here, I think is a nice first step to that, right? Earlier in one of the sessions today, we talked about, the people who get it, and the people who don't, right? So I think the people here are the ones who get it or are on the way to getting it, right? So how do we make sure to spread this message and spread that knowledge to the people who aren't here is, I think, that next challenging step to make sure to include those folks into this conversation and helping to create that kind of culture that we really want to see and inspire for our students, right? Let me see. I have notes, so I just want to make sure I hit everything. So again, just as a last closing, we really hope that you enjoyed your time these last couple days. We hope to see you again whenever that may be. We're going to take a little bit of a break before we decide as to when the next one is going to happen. But be on the lookout for a survey. I mentioned this briefly yesterday. We will have kind of a post-symposium survey that will be going out to kind of get some feedback about what your experience was like here the last few days, as well as, get work on the next one and kind of retool what are some things that we can continue to add and learn as we get forward. Furthermore, as Andrew mentioned, right, there's going to be recorded sessions. Additional resources will be available on the website for folks to be able to revisit. And then lastly, just as a quick shout out, the Pan Asian Staff Association, PASA, is going to be hosting a happy hour at Dirty Birds. So we recommend you going to Dirty Birds and using that as an opportunity for like networking. And with that being said, have a great rest of your week, and thank you.